So look, there's something that's been happening in the gaming world recently that I think a lot of us need to talk about seriously, because this one actually matters, right? And I know on the surface, this whole Sony DRM situation might seem like it resolved itself neatly and everybody can just move on and forget about it. But I don't think that's the right way to look at what just happened here. Not even close. Because what this situation revealed, even in its messy, chaotic, confusing rollout, is that the fundamental tension between what companies think they have the right to do with the games you've paid for and what you actually believe you're entitled to when you hand over your money, that tension is still very much alive. And it's not going anywhere. So let's actually dig into this, because I think it's worth it. Now, for anyone who somehow missed all the chaos that went down online about this, here's where it started. A console modder posted something on social media claiming that Sony was quietly putting DRM onto PlayStation games. And not just any DRM, right? The specific claim was that games you purchase going forward would require your console to connect to the internet at least once every 30 days. Every 30 days. So you buy a game, you pay full price for it, and then 30 days later, the thing just stops working until you go online and essentially ask Sony for permission to keep playing your own game. That was the claim. And I want you to sit with that for a second, because that is a genuinely alarming thing to hear, right? Because what it means in practical terms is that the game you bought isn't really yours. It's on loan, it's got an invisible expiry date baked into it, and you don't even get to see the clock ticking down. You only find out when it stops. And obviously, the internet exploded, which honestly, fair enough. Because if that claim had been accurate, as stated, it would have been one of the most aggressive anti-consumer moves we'd seen from a major platform in a very long time. And the thing is, when you frame it that way, when you actually say out loud that a company is reserving the right to make your game unplayable unless you periodically check in with their servers, that's not a technical design decision, right? That's a control decision. That's a company deciding that it gets to remain in the loop of your relationship with a product you already purchased outright. And that's a problem no matter how you slice it. Now, naturally, because the internet was already in full meltdown mode, things got exaggerated pretty quickly. Because that's what happens, right? Someone posts something alarming, it spreads fast, and by the time it's gone through 10 different forums and 15 different YouTube reaction channels, the original claim has mutated into something even wilder. And sure enough, people started saying things like, yeah, if you don't connect your console in time, you don't just lose access temporarily, you lose the game permanently. As in, game gone, money gone, and oh well, you'd better go buy it again. Which, look, I get why people went there emotionally, because the original claim already felt predatory enough that people's minds went to the worst possible interpretation. That's what happens when trust has been eroded enough that your default assumption about a company's intentions is the worst one. And honestly, can you blame people at this point, given everything that's happened in this industry over the last few years? But here's where things started to get a little clearer. A user on Reset Era, which, if you don't know it, is one of the most well-known gaming forums around, very well sourced, very plugged into the industry, came in and said that what was actually happening was significantly less catastrophic than the initial claim suggested. According to this user, the DRM wasn't designed as an ongoing surveillance mechanism for your gaming library. Instead, the idea was tied specifically to the refund window. And when you hear that framing, it actually starts to make more sense as a policy, even if it's still not ideal, right? The logic goes like this. There's a window of time after you buy a game during which you can request a refund. Sony, apparently, was looking to close a loophole where someone could take their console offline, run through an entire game during that refund window, and then just request their money back, having played the whole thing for free. So the online check would verify that your license is still valid and that you haven't already pulled a refund, and after that one verification, that's it, done, no more checks. Your game works indefinitely from that point forward. And look, I want to be clear that even at that point, before Sony had officially confirmed anything, there was still every reason to be skeptical. Because here's the thing about the way these companies operate, right? They don't give you the benefit of the doubt when they write their terms of service. They write those terms in the broadest possible language so that they can claim maximum flexibility to do whatever they want down the road. So even if the intention behind this DRM was as benign as the Reset Era users suggested, the fact that the underlying infrastructure exists, the fact that there is a mechanism by which your game can be told to check in with Sony's servers or stop functioning that matters, because that mechanism can be adjusted. That mechanism can be expanded. And if there's no law preventing it, companies have shown us again and again that the thing they can do, they will eventually do. Especially when they think nobody's paying close enough attention. But okay. Sony eventually responded, and I say eventually because that's the other thing worth flagging here. Sony took way too long to make a statement. When something blows up this big online, when you've got thousands of players genuinely worried that their purchased games are going to start requiring a permission slip from you every month to function, that's when you respond fast. That's when you get out in front of it. Instead, Sony let the silence stretch out long enough that the speculation got completely out of control, which honestly just made the whole situation worse than it needed to be. But they did respond, finally, to GameSpot. And here's what they said, and I want you to actually listen to this because it matters. Players will continue to have access to and play their purchased games as usual. A single one-time online check is necessary to confirm the game's license, and after that, no further checks will be required. That is Sony's official statement. One check during the first 30 days after purchase, according to GameSpot's reporting. One check, and then the game is yours to play without any further verification demanded of you. So, okay, one check. And I know some people immediately went, see? Not a big deal. Everyone freaked out for nothing. Move on. But here's why I think that response misses the actual point of what this whole situation revealed, right? Because yes, as it turned out, the implementation is way less aggressive than the initial claims suggested. One check in 30 days is fundamentally different from a recurring monthly verification requirement. Those are not the same thing, and it would be dishonest to pretend they are. But, and this is a big but, this whole mess opened up the exact same conversation we've been having over and over again in gaming, which is this. When you buy a digital game, what do you actually own? What are you actually getting? Because the publishers will tell you, and they've been very clear about this, especially after that whole legal situation in the United States that forced platforms to change their language, they'll tell you that you're not buying a game, you're buying a license that lives on their servers, a license that, depending on the terms, they can revoke, modify, or simply let expire. And I want you to think about how that compares to every other thing you buy, right? If you buy a car, it's yours. You drive it off the lot, you own that thing. Nobody from the dealership shows up 30 days later and says, hey, we just need to verify that you're still entitled to start the engine. Could you bring it by the showroom? No, that doesn't happen. Your fridge doesn't stop working after a month because the manufacturer's server couldn't confirm your purchase. Your couch doesn't require an internet connection to be sat on. But a video game, something you might have paid $70, $80, maybe $90 or more for, depending on where you live, that can come with an invisible asterisk that says, by the way, your access to this is conditional, and we'll be the ones deciding what those conditions are going forward. And that asymmetry, that fundamental difference in how digital games are treated compared to literally every other consumer product, is exactly why this conversation keeps coming back. Because it should keep coming back. Because it's not actually resolved just because Sony said one check. The structural issue is still there. Now, look, the Ubisoft situation with The Crew is the thing that always gets brought up in this conversation, and it should, right? Because The Crew is the perfect case study for what happens when a company decides that maintaining a game you paid for is no longer worth their time. Ubisoft pulled the plug, the servers went down, and just like that, everyone's copy of the game became a very expensive coaster. And I want to address something that keeps coming up about this, which is that apparently modders, regular people, not Ubisoft employees, just people who care enough about the game to actually do the work, modders were apparently able to create a file that you could put into the game and it would work again. Work again. Offline. Without Ubisoft servers, which begs an extremely uncomfortable question, right? Because if modders can do that, if people working in their free time with no budget and no access to the source code can figure out how to make the crew playable again, what exactly is Ubisoft's excuse for not doing it? Themselves? Because it can't be technical complexity if the community already solved it. So what is it? Is it that they just don't care? Is it that making the crew work again doesn't generate revenue, so it simply doesn't happen? Is it pure corporate laziness? Whatever the answer is, none of them are acceptable. And none of them would be acceptable in any other industry, right? If you bought a car and the manufacturer remotely disabled it because they decided the model wasn't worth supporting anymore, that would be an absolute scandal. That would be a lawsuit. That would be front page news outside of gaming circles. But because it's a video game, because there's still this cultural tendency to treat gaming as a frivolous hobby rather than a legitimate industry where real money changes hands and real consumer rights should apply, it just kind of happens, and people shrug and move on, and nothing changes. Except things are starting to change. And that's actually the part of this I want to make sure doesn't get buried under all the drama about whether it's 1 check or 30 checks or whatever. Because there's a larger context here that matters a lot. The fact that this Sony DRM story blew up the way it did, the fact that thousands of people immediately understood why a 30-day verification requirement would be a problem and pushed back loudly enough that it became a major story, that's a sign that the awareness is growing, right? People understand now, in a way that they maybe didn't 5 years ago, that the things they're buying digitally are not the same as the things they used to buy physically. That the rules of ownership have been quietly rewritten and not in their favor. And that is a big deal because you cannot fix a problem that you haven't named yet. And we've named it. And we're not going back to not seeing it. And look, it's worth acknowledging that there are platforms out there that actually do this the right way. Steam, right? The actual experience on Steam, for most people, most of the time, is that your games just work. You go offline, your installed games keep running, nobody demands a check-in. The system treats your purchase like something you actually own rather than something you're borrowing until further notice. And then there's GOG, which takes it even further. Buy a game on GOG. You get the actual files, DRM free, no server dependency, no license check, no expiry. You own that game the way you own a book or a disc. And the fact that these models exist, that they're profitable, that millions of people use them, completely obliterates the industry argument that always online requirements and license verification are somehow technically necessary or economically unavoidable. They're not. They're choices, business decisions. And the fact that they're choices means they can be made differently. Which brings me back to the backlash, because I actually think the backlash in this situation was important and useful, even if the initial panic turned out to be more extreme than the reality. Because the way these things work, right, is that companies test, they probe. They introduce something quietly and see how loud the reaction is. And if the reaction is quiet enough, they keep going. And they go a little further next time, and a little further after that. That's how this stuff creeps in. So when the reaction is loud, when players collectively say, no, actually, we're paying attention, and we don't like where this is going, and we're gonna make noise about it that matters, that has an effect. Because the only thing that actually constrains these companies in the absence of laws specifically designed to protect consumer rights in digital spaces is the market pressure of players who are informed enough and engaged enough to push back. And that's what happened here. And it worked. And that's genuinely something to feel good about. Because here's the thing that needs to be understood about where all of this is going, right? This isn't just about one DRM policy from one company. This isn't just about the Crew or Concord or any individual game that got shut down. This is about what digital ownership means going forward. It's about whether the standard expectation of gaming, that you buy a game and it works, that you own it, that it doesn't require ongoing permission from the company that sold it to you to keep functioning, is something that can be maintained, or whether it quietly erodes into something else entirely. into a world where every game has a conditional existence, where every purchase is really a rental dressed up to look like a sale, where the thing you paid for can be taken away whenever someone in a boardroom decides it's no longer profitable to let you have it. And if that's the direction things go, if we just accept it, if we shrug and say, well, what can you do? Then yeah, that is what we'll get. That is exactly what we'll get. But I don't think that's where this ends, because the conversations are happening. The legal frameworks are starting to catch up. We've talked about Stop Killing Games and what's happening at the European level with that. And that movement exists precisely because this issue, the issue of permanent game destruction, of companies selling you something they plan to take away, has reached a point where elected officials are sitting up and paying attention, because it should be taken seriously. Because games are not throwaway consumer products, right? They are culture, they are art, they are documents of what it felt like to be alive at a particular moment in time. And once they're gone, and that loss is real, whether or not anyone in a publisher's finance department counts it on a spreadsheet. So yeah, the Sony DRM situation in its final form turned out to be less catastrophic than the initial reporting suggested. One check, 30 days, and then you're free to play indefinitely. Okay, that's better than what was initially feared. But the reason this story matters, the reason I think it's worth sitting with even after the drama has died down, is because of what it reminded us. It reminded us that these systems exist, that the infrastructure for more aggressive verification, for ongoing license checks, for conditional access to games you've paid for, that infrastructure is being built quietly and incrementally into the platforms and services we use every day. And the only reason any of it gets walked back, the only reason companies clarify and soften and respond to concern, is because players make enough noise that ignoring it stops being the easier option. So keep making noise. Keep paying attention. Keep asking the uncomfortable question of what you actually own when you hand over your money for a digital game, because that question doesn't have a comfortable answer yet, and it won't until the industry is forced by law, by pressure, by all of us refusing to just move on, to give you one. And I think that's worth fighting for. Let me know what you think in the comments. Keep following all of this because it is genuinely moving forward, and I'll see you all for the next one.